All right, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. Universal Mastery. In our today's video, we're going to be speaking about something that is really important to know, and this is going to help you better go through your own inner process and understand how to navigate your past. So we're going to be speaking about why you don't want to go back to old relationships, towns, or jobs. This is really important, especially in the beginning stages of your development process, really taking it seriously and separating from your old self. Okay, so this is exactly what we're going to be speaking about in this video, the importance of staying away from these things, especially in the beginning stages. And then we can even go and touch on it later on in the video, how some of these things could potentially be valuable to revisit later down the road, but from a healthier space. All right, so if this is something that you are interested in, then I highly recommend you stay tuned for the rest of the video, and I will see you on the other side. Okay, so why is it so important to stay away from old relationships, old towns, and old jobs, and to never go back to them for the most part? Why is it so important? Because these things have an energetic resonance that is directly connected to your old self. So with the relationship that you got into that didn't work out, there's a reason why it didn't work out. With the town that you decided to leave, there's a reason why you made a choice to leave. With the job that just didn't click and you ended up getting let go, or you ended up quitting, there is a reason why that happened. It is important to know that there is a reason why things panned out and played out the exact way that they did. But one of the most important things that you can know is that these things are going to carry energetic threads of your old self. What does that actually mean? Okay, what does it mean these things carry energetic threads of your old self? The certain energetic resonance that you were originally in when you were in that relationship, in that town, working that job, is no longer the version of you that is watching this video today. So if you're really quick to want to jump back and try to get back into that relationship with that person, or to enter back into that town that you originally left from, or to reapply for that same type of corporation or company that you were working, in other words, a lot of the times what you might be doing with that is you're just reattaching to a familiar pattern that is connected to your old ways of being, that are no longer in your interest, in your best interest anymore. So you're basically running to your old self when your soul is trying to bring you to the new you. It's trying to embody your authentic self to create a new reality, a new life. Now, the reason why that this is so important to acknowledge, especially in the beginning stages of you starting to ground more into your own authenticity, is because with the familiarity patterns of these old things, what it can do is it can significantly stimulate parts of yourself that are oftentimes going to be protective parts of you, that are going to try to protect you in ways that aren't always in your best interest. So in other words, you try to go back to that old town that you grew up in, where there was a lot of trauma that you went through. As you're in that old town, it's going to be triggering vulnerabilities in regards to certain parts of you that are carrying wounds from the past. As those vulnerabilities are getting triggered and activated, like maybe a deep-seated sense of betrayal, mistrust, sadness, fear, etc., it's going to activate a lot of protective parts of you that are trying to then keep you safe, but sometimes these protective parts are keeping you safe in extreme ways that are actually damaging you. So that can come in the form of substance abuse. You start developing a substance abuse problem that you remember from your past, but ever since you left your old town, you got it under control and you really worked through that trauma and you regulated that. But now that you're back in your old town again, it sparks back up again. So you start gravitating towards that unhealthy relationship with substances again. And it's because you don't yet have capacity to understand how to revisit this old energy from a regulated space to really process it in a healthy way. And the simple thing is you're just not ready for it yet. It doesn't mean you're never going to be ready to revisit and then work through those emotions. It just means it's too early for you to do that at the moment because you don't have capacity. So one of the best things you can do is just give yourself that time to not have to look. Let me say it like this. Give yourself that time to not have to revisit the past when you're not ready to do that. Okay? Because you're going to be revisiting the past enough when it comes to processing your trauma wherever it is that you currently are anyways. But there's a big difference from processing your trauma in a new environment or a new place in life than actually going back to the physical environment that you once used to live. And same thing with old relationships, and same thing with old jobs. Okay, a lot of the times our minds can try to create these stories that, oh, if I go back, it's going to be different. If I do it this way, maybe it'll be different. But remember, there is a reason why your soul went down a completely different path in the first place. And to continue honoring this new direction that your soul is trying to bring you towards is absolutely going to be in your best interest. So when these protective parts of us get stimulated, they start grabbing onto old ways of behavior, old ways of thinking, and old ways of being that are going to oftentimes keep us stagnant again. Just like that example that I gave with that protective part of us gravitating towards substance abuse to try to keep us safe. And for those of you that don't understand how parts work, this protective part of us is trying to keep us safe from the emotions that are getting triggered. Those vulnerable parts, when those parts of us get triggered, it's the protective parts that try to keep us safe from feeling those emotions. But in order to actually heal, we have to feel them. So we have to have a relationship with all these different parts of ourselves so that we can really integrate this repressed energy in the system and regulate our system so our parts can trust us. But when we don't have that regulation and we don't have that trust, sometimes these protective parts of us can be so strong, it's almost like they override our nervous system, and then we act in ways that normally we wouldn't act, and we do things we normally wouldn't do, and we think things we normally wouldn't think. And these energies can be very familiar to the old you in the past that used to be enmeshed in all of that trauma during that time. So this is why, especially in the beginning stages of learning to regulate your nervous system, learning to understand yourself and your own authenticity at that, it can be so important to have boundaries with old relationships, old jobs, and old towns that you grew up in, assuming you're not still living there, okay? It can be so important. Give yourself that time because that creates safety within the system so you can regulate, so you can rewire your nervous system to be more of who you've always been, so that if you do decide to get in contact with that person or to go into that town or to maybe look at that job that you once looked at or that you once worked in the past, you're going to have a completely different understanding of yourself and a different relationship that you can have with that energy that is also representing your old self. Because if you go into it prematurely, you're going to get sucked right back in to your old self. And those energetic strings are really going to start warping your perception. And you're going to find yourself feeling like you just took 10 steps backwards. And if that does end up happening to you, it's it's okay. It's a part of the process. It's not the end of the world. It's not that you're going 10 steps backwards. You're just learning a lesson. Okay? But once again, creating the safety that you need can be quite important through your healing process so that you're more regulated and you're more grounded in yourself for when you do decide to work with that intensity of this older energy. I will share a personal story with you of a time when I went back to my old hometown after I had moved away for several years. So I originally grew up in Maryland, and I left Maryland, I want to say probably in 2017, and I moved to Florida to basically completely do a reset on my life. That's literally what it was. I did a complete reset, a complete 360. Left everything behind, basically shedding the old, preparing for the new. And it worked. I'm not going to lie. I'm here now because I did that. Had I not made that choice and made that decision, I probably would not be here right now. But it was a long journey and it was not easy to do that at all. But even though I moved to Florida, I grew up most of my life in Maryland. So I had a lot of energetic familiarity that was still existing in Maryland. And even when I lived in Florida, for a period of almost 2 years, I kept consistently manifesting familiar energy from my past, especially through my friends. I had a lot of friends in Maryland that I used to hang out with consistently. I was manifesting familiar archetypes of people in my life all the way in a different state when I was living in Florida. There was several people that I attracted in my life that reminded me of my friends from back home, but the relationships that I had with them was very different than the friends that I had back home. Because back home, there was a lot of codependency types of relationships that I was in. And we're all young, so we're all like learning how to navigate life and everything of that nature. Whereas when I was living in Florida, it was more of a professional setting because a lot of these people I attracted were people that I was currently working with. So we had more of a adult responsibility, so there wasn't as much codependency. But I share that just to let you know how these energetic strings work. Even though I left the state that I grew up in and moved to a completely different state where I didn't know anybody, I literally manifested people that were very similar to some of my friends from the past because that energetic resonance was still in my nervous system. And that took time to basically work its way through and to play out in the way that it did. And I didn't attach to anything in an unhealthy way in regards to friendships or relationships. I just let them come and I let them go. And that was good. And it ultimately led me to really building the YouTube channel that I now have, which I do, as something that I'm very passionate about and is currently something that is very successful. So I'm very thankful for all of that. But at some point, it was in 2020, so I think it had been roughly like close to 3 years that I had been in Florida and I had not yet gone back to Maryland. And I decided to go and visit my family in Maryland, which was my dad's side of the family. And I went and I visited, and I remember going back to Maryland and literally seeing my old neighborhood that I literally grew up in at a young age and being around all this energy that was familiar. And I'm not even kidding you. I felt an energy that seemingly possessed my body. And the energy, the best way that I was able to describe it is it felt like my old self. It was the weirdest thing I've ever experienced, but it literally felt like my old self possessed my body. And I started noticing the difference between how I was by myself when I was living in Florida in comparison. Give me 1 second. My cat wants to go outside. Okay, go ahead. No, it's raining. See? So as I was saying, I noticed the energetic difference from when I was in Florida in comparison to when I visited my hometown. And it was such a visceral change in energy. It literally felt like I was possessed by my older self that used to kind of be stuck in a lot of these unhealthy patterns and unhealthy relationships and was at a really hard point in my life, like on a personal level. That exact same energy felt like it started really overriding my nervous system, and then it warped a lot of my behavior. It warped a lot of my mindset. And then I noticed I started doing things again, hanging out with similar people that I was used to hanging out with that weren't necessarily the healthiest people to be around. And I started abusing substances again. I started drinking a lot more alcohol than what I was currently doing when I was living in Florida. So it's like I kind of warped myself right back into my old self in a matter of just going from 3 years of separation from my hometown, shifting my energy drastically, feeling a certain way, and then going back to my hometown. And with all of that familiarity and all of that repressed energy that was still rooted in my body at a trauma level, as that all started to come through, it's like I could feel the visceral sensation and emotion of my older self that was so wounded over there. And it was a crazy moment because I'm pretty self-aware. So I could notice the energy coming into my body and I just sort of let it be there. So this energy that I'm referring to, this is a part of me. It's still a part of me that technically was existing in the past. So me revisiting my hometown, it's like I'm revisiting this part of me that's still frozen there, that's still wounded and still operating in that unhealthy way to try to cope through all the pain. So if I was a little bit more conscious and I was a little bit more grounded, I would have gone back to my hometown and I would not have given in or fallen into these unhealthy patterns and behaviors and acted on these thoughts, because I would have known that that part of me just needs nurturance. It just needs love and it needs attention. But because I wasn't aware of that at the time, the energy kind of overrode my system and I just started acting impulsively with that energy and then going down these, basically these paths that were not the healthiest paths to be going down. And that is what that is. And, I don't regret it. It is what it is. I learned from it. But now with where I am as I'm speaking about it, I have a much more, I would say, mature approach to if I was going to go through that process again. And I remember that after that whole vacation ended, when I was visiting my hometown, and then I came back to Florida, I drove, and as soon as I got back to Florida, the whole drive back, which was I think like a 12-hour drive, if I'm not mistaken, from Maryland to Florida, I could feel the old me slowly integrating in my body. It was like one of the weirdest feelings, but it was very visceral. And literally by the time I touched back down in Florida, there was a crab that pulled out in front of my car and it crossed the road. And then it just went in front of me. And the way that I sort of interpreted that symbolism was the crab was the shell. But inside of the crab, you have the tenderness, the tender meats. But on the surface, it's very shelled. So the fact that the crab crossed the road for me was almost like I was processing this shelled aspect of myself from the past. An aspect of me that was not really vulnerable, but was shelled up and had specific protective responses and had to cope in certain ways that were not healthy. But by the time I drove back to Florida, I was really processing a lot of that energy. And it was almost like I manifested this experience to happen in front of me where the crab was a representation of my old self. And it was like crossing the road. So that symbolism of crossing too. It was actually a very healing moment. But it was also in that moment that I realized there's a lot of energy still in my past that I wasn't necessarily ready to go physically visit yet. I still had to do more work on myself internally before I could go back there and revisit it at that physical level in a more grounded, mature type of way. So this is my little story to help you understand this process and to help you navigate this so that you can use this in your own life and apply it where it suits you best. Okay, so here's the information. Hopefully you can use it to your advantage. Once again, visiting these old things is not bad. It just is the time that you visit them and making sure that you have capacity so that when you go to visit it, you don't get warped back into that unhealthy cycle. You want to visit it with maturity and with a preparedness to process heavy emotions so that you know what you're getting yourself into and you can better integrate everything that does get triggered. It can be a really powerful healing tool, but it's going to be intense. So you want to make sure you have that capacity, which is why I refer to not going back to these things in the earlier stages of you learning to come back into yourself, because it can really throw things off balance, and people can sometimes get warped so deeply back into their old self that they don't ever get out of it again. They just settle for it and they stay in it. So hopefully, once again, this message can kind of open your awareness to what I'm talking about. All right. If you enjoyed this, thumbs it up, drop down in the comment section. Let me know if you're resonating with what I'm teaching or what I'm sharing here. Hit the notification bell and get notified whenever I post, because clearly this is very important information that a lot of people need to hear and are gaining value from. So definitely tap into it. Hit the subscribe button, because by subscribing, you are further energetically connecting to everything it is that I'm teaching. Copy and paste the link and send it to someone that you also know may need to hear this, because that could really support someone's process. All right, check out my Patreon. Patreon is the first link below. You can't miss it. Tons of exclusive content that I have put blood, sweat, and tears into creating. Everything is organized into different collection sections that you can navigate from start to finish, that is going to support you through your whole evolutionary process when it comes to spirituality, occultism, education on trauma, and regulation of your nervous system. All of the pieces that matter the most over on my Patreon. Tier 3 and 4 is extremely unique. This is a ritual service, which is the only ritual that I personally ever perform, and it is on you as the receiving participant. It's an energetic transfer from me to you to support you through processing the deeper layers of your unconscious mind, so that you can surface these things up, come into more acceptance with them, and integrate them. As you integrate these repressed energies, it's going to start really drastically changing your life. Okay? So if this is something that you're in resonance with, definitely look into it. All of it is in the first link below. And currently there's about 300 active participants that take place in this ritualistic service on a monthly basis, with tons of positive feedback at that. So once again, if you resonate with it, look into it. Second link is where you can book one-on-one calls, or you can jump into mentorships. I literally work with people from all over the world. It's the most intimate way to personally connect, and I get to know your own trauma history, and I get to help you build a foundation specifically accustomed to you. That's going to help you process that trauma. It's going to help you regulate your nervous system. And once we have that in place, we can even talk about occult initiation if that is also something that you're interested in. Okay, all of that's in the second link. Third link is the YouTube memberships. This is where you join the family, and I would be so honored to have you a part of the family. That's what we are. We're a group of like-minded individuals that come together, and we're here to support each other through some of these deeper layers of the unconscious mind. Third link below. With that being said, we're going to wrap it up here. I appreciate all of you very much, and I hope you all have an amazing rest of the day or night, wherever you are, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.